All right, welcome to the Young Turks. Cenk, Uygur, and Kasparian with you guys tonight. Well, we've got a big show ahead for you guys, and obviously lots of developments in the Kavanaugh story, which we're going to do in just a minute here. We've got some in the first segment, some in the second segment, because it's a giant, giant story. Later on, if you follow us on YouTube, you might have seen my video raging about Jake Tapper segment on CNN featuring Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. They aggressively challenged her, claiming that her programs cost too much. No, really? On cable news? They attacked the progressives, saying that their ideas are not realistic and pragmatic? Why, I've never seen that before, except every single segment done on cable news on all three stations for decade after decade after decade.
Yeah, when it has to do with a progressive, all of a sudden CNN very curious about detailed policy proposals.
Yeah. Oh, you'd like to cut taxes by trillions of dollars for the rich. You'd like to start wars and claim, as the Bush administration did, that the Iraq war would cost $1.7 billion, not trillion, $billion. Okay. Anyway, so what he did was terribly misleading at best. And I think there was, in reality, a big lie in that segment. And so I want to expose what that is. That's going to be a little bit later in the program after we get through the Kavanaugh stories. And I don't want you to miss that. Well, there's a ton of news today, so let's get going.
All right. Over the weekend, the anonymous woman who had made sexual assault allegations against Supreme Court nominee Brett Kavanaugh decided to reveal her identity and give specific details about what she says happened back in the 1980s when he allegedly sexually assaulted her. Her name is Christine Blasey Ford, and she is a psychology professor in Northern California. And she spoke with Emma Brown of the Washington Post and did give some specific details that I want to share with you. She claims that at the time, even though she doesn't remember the exact date, Kavanaugh was 17 years old and she believes she was 15 years old. Now, on one summer in the early 1980s, Kavanaugh and a friend, both stumbling drunk, corralled Ford into a bedroom during a gathering of teenagers at a house in Montgomery County. She was quoted as saying that while his friend watched, Kavanaugh pinned her to a bed on her back and groped her over her clothes, grinding his body against hers and clumsily attempting to pull off her one-piece bathing suit and the clothing she wore over it. When she tried to scream, he put his hand over her mouth. So at that point, she says that she feared for her life. In fact, she was quoted as saying, "I thought he might inadvertently kill me." And it wasn't until the other person in the room, Kavanaugh's friend, Mark Judge, it wasn't until he got involved that she was able to escape. Kavanaugh's friend and classmate at Georgetown Prep School, Mark Judge, jumped on top of them, sending all three tumbling. Ford ran from the room, briefly locked herself in a bathroom, and then fled the house. So there are important pieces of, in my opinion, evidence that really help reinforce her story, and we'll get to that in just a minute. But Cenk, I'd like you to jump in.
So one thing I want to be clear about in terms of the friend Judge and his role in it, he earlier had put out a statement saying, "I have no recollection of that," which I found to be inconclusive, to say the least. Usually saying "I have no recollection of that" means, well, do you have the evidence yet or don't you? But now he's much clearer on the record. He says, "It's just absolutely nuts. I never saw Brett act that way." He described Kavanaugh as a brilliant student and not, quote, "not into anything crazy or illegal." Now there's lots of talk by Judge, who later went into rehab. In fact, wrote a book about his travails with drinking. Lots of talk in his book about that. And there's even a guy who appears to be Kavanaugh in the book. They used a very slight pseudonym for him.
It was literally, his last name was literally O. Kavanaugh.
Yeah, that's the smallest pseudonym you could do. Anyway, apparently they were both drinking heavily that summer. You do with that what you will, and I want everybody to be super clear. Nobody's judging Kavanaugh for drinking too much when he was in high school. That's not remotely the issue. The issue is what he did that day, okay? Mm-hmm. And so, on the other hand, as even Megyn Kelly pointed out, if she's making up the story, why would she put a friend of his in the room which would only corroborate his story if they remain friends. So it's not the type of thing that you would do if you, I don't think, if you were making up a story. And now, look, if we're gonna get into it, you have, like, there's a lot of Republican chatter about how this is 11th hour move by the Democrats, like at the last minute. Okay, but to me that's irrelevant. The only question is it true or is it not true? So should they have released it earlier? Well, Dianne Feinstein was apparently trying to keep her identity secret because she didn't want it coming out. Now it's too late for that, and so maybe it would have never come out if it wasn't for some of the other Democratic senators, et cetera. But that explains the 11th hour thing. It doesn't go towards whether it's true or not. So that's what we have to try to judge here. And you might come to a conclusion that's inconclusive, right? You might say, hey, it's 35 years ago. They both have spotty memories. One side was heavily drinking, et cetera, et cetera. But I think that's the question. And in the very beginning, when this story first broke, we asked the question of, whoa, if it's back in high school, it's got to be a pretty high bar to have this affect a nomination. Well, attempted rape has met that bar.
Exactly. So there are things that we've learned about Ford's past that I think are very relevant in reinforcing her story. So one of the main things that an accuser gets asked is whether or not he or she spoke to someone in their personal life about the attempted sexual misconduct or alleged sexual misconduct. And she hadn't spoken to anyone in her personal life. However, she and her husband did go to couples therapy in 2012, where she opened up to a therapist about this. So let me give you the details on that. Ford said she told no one of the incident in any detail until 2012. Again, 2012, that's an important year, remember that. When she was in couples therapy with her husband, the therapist's notes do not mention Kavanaugh's name, but say she was attacked by students from an elitist boys' school who went on to become highly respected and high-ranking members of society in Washington. So she did, it's on the record, it's in the therapist's notes, which were shared with the Washington Post. But there's more. Notes from an individual therapy session the following year show Ford described a rape attempt in her late teens. Then there's the third piece of, in my opinion, evidence in this case. So one of the things that Ford did, when this was all happening back in July and we had no idea about it, was she approached Washington lawyer Deborah Katz. She told her about these allegations. And so Katz responded with, everyone's gonna think you're lying. And so to deal with that inevitable outcome ahead of time, Ford agreed to do a polygraph test. And so she took a lie detector test and she passed. And so that is an important piece of evidence as well. However, Brett Kavanaugh is aggressively denying these allegations. When the allegations first came up with no details included, he said, I categorically and unequivocally deny this allegation. I did not do this back in high school or at any time. And he was even asked about this by Senator Hirono from Hawaii. And here's what he had to say.
Since you became a legal adult, have you ever made unwanted requests for sexual favors or committed any verbal or physical harassment or assault of a sexual nature?
No.
Have you ever faced discipline or entered into a settlement related to this kind of conduct?
No.
So he has been denying all these allegations. There were other statements of denial that came out after this, but we'll see how this plays out. Right now, you have Democrats and even some Republicans calling for a postponement of the Senate judiciary vote on Kavanaugh. They were set to vote on his confirmation this week on September 20th, but that is now in jeopardy considering the detailed allegations that came out over the weekend.
So Ford had married her husband in 2002, and early in their relationship, she told him she'd been a victim of physical abuse. And that was 10 years before they went to couples therapy, and the therapist noted it in their records. Now, there is something in there that cuts in two directions. One is the obvious one. She didn't go to a therapist the other day after Kavanaugh was appointed to be a Supreme Court justice, and they're going through the confirmation hearings, and she says all of a sudden, hey, I remember Kavanaugh. Right, no, this is back in 2012 and 2013 that it's in the therapist notes. Now, the thing that cuts in the other direction is at the time, he was already a high-ranking judge, and she was aware, according to the people, including her ex-husband, that he could be nominated for a higher position. Okay, so then think about that for a second, though. In order for you to, there's two possibilities if you're in the camp of Kavanaugh didn't do it. First of all, you should check yourself as to why you're in that camp. Are you in that camp because you're positive about the details of the story, or you like his policy positions and hence think, well, I'm gonna tilt things in his direction, okay? Because I ask myself that all the time. I've been asking it for the last 3 days as we've been covering this story about, wait, who do I believe and why do I believe them, right? So you would have to think that either she was telling the truth, she just had the wrong guy, and it's 35 years ago, and it was Kavanaugh or O'Connor, I don't know, right? But that's, look, it's 35 years ago, it was in high school, it is some possibility. You could be in that camp, right? You could be in the camp that she's, it's not a thing you could fudge, right? It's not a thing that's miscommunication. So now, I don't want people to misunderstand this as I talk about it. So if it was a date rape situation, it would be just as bad. The but in that is there would be more room for miscommunication 35 years later. I thought he meant this and I thought she meant that. That is not the situation here. She describes that they don't know each other except that they're at this party and Kavanaugh and Judge are drinking upstairs, and at some point, and she's vague on the details, and because it was a long time ago, and just consider all the factors here, right? She doesn't remember how she got home, etc. But she says, she clearly remembers they pulled her into a room. It was basically an abduction within the party. So it leaves less room for, I thought she meant this and I thought he meant that. So this is a stark case here. So then you have to think she made it up, because it's not a miscommunication. It's not a he said, she said in terms of how did that particular night go, how did that particular day go, how did that date go, okay? So this is, no, they pulled me in the room, he pinned me down, and then covered my mouth when I started screaming. Okay, so now back to the therapist, 2012, 2013. Do you think she's a respected professor in her field in psychology? She is at Palo Alto College, I believe. They do work with Stanford, etc. Well respected, right? She's 51 years old. Do you think, so I guess 6 years ago, she would have been 45. A 45-year-old is gonna go into a couples therapy session about her marriage, and in that kind of setting, is gonna set up a lie just in case this Kavanaugh guy winds up being confirmed, because she doesn't come forward then. She's not worried about his federal judge positions at that point. It's gonna set up a lie that might come into play 6 years, 12 years later, in the middle of her couples therapy, trying to save her marriage.
I mean, and if she were to do that, wouldn't she just name him rather than, using a description? And by the way, the polygraph test is important. The lie detector test is important. And she is willing, based on what her lawyer says, to testify before senators to answer any questions that they may have. Brett Kavanaugh responded by saying that he would also testify. These are all important details. And look, I don't know what the truth is. We don't know without a shadow of a doubt what the truth is. We're not investigating this case. We just know the details that have been reported, that have been made public. But what I'm calling for, and what I think is a reasonable request, is to postpone this vote so a real investigation can take place. Because look, anyone else who's applying for any job, any average American applying for any average job, would have to deal with some sort of an investigation if these types of allegations were lodged against them. Or they wouldn't even have a chance at getting that job. But this is a possible Supreme Court justice. He should be held to a higher standard because he is going to make decisions that impact our lives. And so I think it makes all the sense in the world to not rush through a vote so Republicans can have their political win. Let's take politics out of it for a second and actually look into these allegations to see if there's any truth behind them.
And she has, throughout all the therapist notes, et cetera, and the discussions she had in the past, referred to it as a rape attempt. So it's not a scandalous thing she made up today to make it sound worse. No, that's how she's always described it. She said that it traumatized her for years on end, her relationship, and that's why it came up in the therapy sessions, her relationship with other men, etc. She also went on to say that if Judge hadn't jumped on top of there, and we don't know what his motivations were, and they're both apparently, as she describes it, incredibly drunk. But if he hadn't done that and she hadn't then gotten loose, that she was worried he might have inadvertently killed her. And that's how serious it was. And by the way, how did she get away? This part, at least in her account, is clear. She ran, as soon as they fell off the bed, she immediately ran into a bathroom and locked it and would not come out until she heard them stumbling down the stairs. Then she unlocked the door and ran out of the house, okay? So it is, the description of the event is very stark. So you have to believe that she made all of that up 6 years ago to try to frame Kavanaugh today. That's a hell of a thing to do. So, and look, let me just touch on the politics real quick. It's, if you think she made it up, then you think it's because of politics. And now, of course, the smears have already begun, and like legitimate things to talk about. Is she a Democrat? Is she a Republican? For example, Roy Moore's accusers were Republicans. So in a sense, they had more credibility because they had no political dog in the fight to begin with, right? I get it, and the professor here has given small amounts to Democrats before. It's not some big donor or anything like that, but okay, you can take that into account. So if you think she's lying, you think it's because of politics, and I get that this would delay it. And then if it's delayed, or if Kavanaugh has to withdraw, they will not be able to get a new nominee before the elections. And as things stand today, and this is not what the Democrats expected, but as it turns out, there's a poll out today saying Democrats are leading in Arizona and Tennessee in Senate races that were expected to go to Republicans, which would flip the Senate, which could affect Kavanaugh or the next judge's appointment. Obviously, remembering what happened with Merrick Garland and how the Republicans blocked it for an enormous period of time. So there are those political forces at play. So if I thought it's something that's made up, I'd say, look, you got to keep it real. That's a consideration here. Would the Republicans do something like that? Well, I would be skeptical, right? I'd look into it pretty closely, given how much this might affect the overall seat, the Supreme Court seat. Yeah. But given her story, it would be extraordinary if she was making it up. I mean, that would be foresight and political calculation in a field that she is not in at all. In the midst of the toughest times in her life, that would be borderline shocking. And she's already passed the polygraph test. But it looks like they're both gonna go and testify, so we'll have more information. So should they delay these proceedings?
Absolutely.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm telling you that not because I want to delay it because of political reasons. I just explained it to you so you can make up your own mind as to what you think the political calculations are. So irrespective of that, you can't, or because of that, hey, the Democrats might be able to delay if they win the Senate, etc. I'm just going to push this guy through, even though he might have done an attempted rape at some point, is not a sentence you want to speak. I mean, and to be fair to the Republicans, a number of them, not all of them, not most of them, but a couple of them have now come out and said, no, we got to hear them out, and we especially have to hear her out. So that's good, and of course, Democrats agree.
There's one final part of this that I want to touch on, and it has to do with what you had referenced earlier, Cenk, about the book that Mark Judge had written. So Mark Judge had to go to rehab for alcoholism, and he had written about that in his book, and wrote extensively about his experience drinking when he was much younger. And Deborah Katz, who is the lawyer for Ford, touched on the fact that Judge had denied these accusations, but also talked about how certain things are now missing. They've been scrubbed from the record, either on social media or otherwise, pertaining to Mark and what he had said, Mark Judge and what he had said about his lifestyle and Kavanaugh's lifestyle earlier. So I want to give you that video so you can see what she has to say about it. Take a look.
The other person who was in the room, a man by the name of Mark Judge, according to your client, says this didn't happen. He said it's just nuts. This didn't happen. Your response?
Well, he's also written 3 books and many articles and Twitter posts that have all now been completely scrubbed from the public domain, where he acknowledges that that was behavior that from his Georgetown prep school days, that they routinely engaged in tremendous drinking and really inappropriate behavior, and that the drinking was so severe that they were blacked out regularly. That's now been scrubbed.
I think that's relevant. I mean, why are you scrubbing those things if you have nothing to hide?
So we'll see if people can find that. You can't really erase anything on the internet, so we'll see if they find those. And it might be just personally embarrassing things to him that he didn't expect that the whole world's going to be looking at him. We don't know if it's necessarily related to Kavanaugh, but obviously erasing things at the 11th hour is relevant. And another thing that's relevant here, and by the way, if you care about Ford's politics, then you should care about Mike Judge's politics, because if you think, hey, well, if she's a Democrat, that might influence her to lie. Well, Mike Judge is a Republican and has written for the Daily Caller, the Weekly Standard, and obviously is friends with Kavanaugh, so keep that in mind as well. So last thing from my perspective on this is, remember, Ford did not want to come forward, and she went on to say through her attorneys that she was actually thankful to Feinstein. That was a conversation we had on Friday. Did Feinstein cover this up because she thought it wasn't, not a big deal, but that, hey, it's not right to bring up accusations from high school, or it won't play well politically? We were having that conversation. Well, it appears that question has been settled to some degree, because Ford and her lawyer are saying, no, Feinstein was trying to do right by us. We didn't want to come out because we knew we would be viciously attacked, right or wrong, and that those smears have begun. So I told you the tip of the iceberg on things that aren't even smears. They're just about her voting record, et cetera. But questioning her credibility, et cetera, has also begun today. And apparently, Ford explained to the Washington Post, these are all the ills I was trying to avoid. Now that she's been exposed, because BuzzFeed reporters had gone in and other reporters had started calling all of her friends, she knew that they already knew who she was, and it was gonna get revealed. She says, now I feel like my civic responsibility is outweighing my anguish and terror about retaliation. So keep that in mind too. So if this was a plant from back in 2012, why did she feel this anxiety about the anguish and terror of having to come forward? So much so that she didn't come forward. She went to her congresswoman, she went to Feinstein, she remained anonymous with the press, but she didn't want to name herself and go through all this stuff because she knows what the right-wing attack machine looks like. And she's been forced into the spotlight now because of reporters uncovering who she is. Well, that's also relevant. If it was a trap, why wouldn't you come out immediately and say, yeah, got you, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of evidence for the moment being in the public record that seems to indicate that she's telling the truth. She certainly, in my estimation, thinks she's telling the truth, and there's good evidence to back her up. I guess the last thing that those guys would hang their hat on is maybe she had the wrong guy, but she seems pretty clear on who it was.
Yeah.
By the way, Mike Judge also does not deny that Kavanaugh was there. He just says none of this ever happened.
Right, exactly. All right, we're gonna take a break, but when we come back, we're going to give you some of the smear campaigning that's coming from Republicans. We're also going to give some credit to Republican senators who are saying, let's pump the brakes and postpone this vote before we make a mistake. So come right back, I'll tell you who those people are.
We hope you're enjoying this free clip from the Young Turks. If you want to get the whole show and more exclusive content while supporting independent media, become a member at tyt.com/join today. In the meantime, enjoy this free segment. All right, back on the Young Turks. First YouTube super chat. Alex Cruz says, I can't remember the last time the GOP put ethics before party. They'll push him through because of an agenda. They don't care about rape. I mean, look at the president.
Right.
Well, except that Donald Trump has misplayed this a little bit, to say the least. Because now the two senators we're about to tell you in a second that are not saying let's go forward no matter what are Flake and Corker, who the president has pissed off over and over and over again. So now they're like, delay. right? So, told you, he's totally incompetent.
Do you think we're gonna have a longer discussion about this later, but with Corker and Flake, do you really think that their calls to postpone the vote is political, or?
No, I mean, is it relevant that they hate Trump and Trump has attacked them over and over? I think it is relevant.
Yeah, I think it's relevant.
Yeah. Would they have pushed forward with the Republican agenda otherwise? Maybe. So, okay, we'll talk about that again, like you said, in a sec. Samuel Vimesas writes in on YouTube Super Chat, Brock Turner on Trump's SCOTUS list as well, referring to the Stanford student, of course, that had committed a rape. Fantorang says Kavanaugh is a liar just as everyone else around Trump and Trump himself. Well, Kavanaugh has been caught lying a couple of times already in the testimony. Steve, now I'm going to go to the members' comments. Stephen Mankey says, really the scary thing is to think of how common the Kavanaugh situation is given how reluctant most girls are to come forward for understandable reasons. Think about all the people who have not come forward. It's a good point by Stephen. Michelle with an excellent point in the members section. She said, I am furious with the Kavanaugh situation. I'm so disgusted with the gender bias inherent in this story. Boys being intoxicated equals being less responsible for their actions. A girl being intoxicated, she becomes responsible for not only her actions, but the actions of someone violating her.
That's right.
That's a great point, Michelle.
That always happens, always.
Yes, thank you for writing that in. And now I'm going to tell you about membership, so let me just start by giving you one quote here. Alan today writes in from members section, I just became a member after listening for free for a couple of years, and I absolutely love all of the content. I can't believe how much you get for only $5 a month. It's more than worth it. Thanks for everything you guys do. Thank you, Alan. We appreciate it. Thank you for signing up too. And we do think it's a bit like progressive Netflix. You've got more than a dozen shows that you could watch and listen to. So one of the questions you guys have been asking about is, hey, what happened to the investment money? So I want to just address that real quick here for a second. First, since we're doing the membership drive, let's take a look at where we are. Remember, we started right after Labor Day at 27,661. It's at tyt.com/join to become a member. Let's see where we are today. 31,405. So that is great beginning to this drive. We got to keep that going. We're calling it Be on the Left Side of History and help us build a home of progressives. So that naturally leads to questions that are understandable. Hey guys, you got investment money back in 2017. It was $20 million. So what did you guys do with it? Okay, now let's just acknowledge no other company would ever tell you. Okay, that's a state secret. No, it's et cetera, et cetera. Can I tell you all the details? Of course not. I can't tell you people's salaries, their privacy concerns, et cetera, et cetera. But I will share with you guys more than almost anyone else will. And the first part of it is that you have to understand, and we get really into inside baseball here, but because your trust is super important to us. And I think we've earned it over the last 16 years, but it's partly by being honest like this and telling you how things work, right? When you ask. So investment does not equal revenue. In order to be a sustainable business, your revenues have to equal your costs and hopefully be a little above them, okay? So when you take investment money in, that doesn't mean that you have become sustainable or that you can go to the Bahamas. That's not how it works. The way it works is you take the money in and you put it into infrastructure, into building a company that can then become sustainable and hopefully profitable, okay? So what does that mean? Well, there's mundane things like HR and finance, and you guys might think, well, I ain't got nothing to do with finance. Okay, that doesn't help me. That's not an extra show. You're right, but a company needs that. There's no way around that. And so that is a little bit of what the money went into. The other things are things that we've been dying to give you guys for all these years. Look at all the new wonderful apps that we have on Androids and iOS, et cetera. The new websites launched. That takes engineers. I know that Donald Trump thinks engineers are weak, but we happen to think they're strong. And we've got a good team of engineers now and product guys, et cetera, so that we can give you all the products so that you can easily watch and consume the shows that we've been giving you. The other part of it, of course, is the shows themselves. So there's a whole bunch of new shows. partly because we're now up on skinny bundles like YouTube TV, and there are more to come. Partly because we wanted to give you guys those shows as podcasts, etc. So Anna's got a new show, No Filter. John Idarola has a new show, Damage Report, Reasonably Sure by Michael Schur. You know, Aggressive Progressive has been around a while, but also to maintain that and bring on the Jimmy Dore Show as a podcast, etc. All that requires producers, editors, graphics people, stage crew, let alone the hosts. So obviously those are all expenses. That's what you build. You build what we call the home of progressives, and I think it's fair to characterize it, as I just did a little while ago, as a progressive Netflix. Then you have to make revenue to try to make sure that you cover your costs. So there's still a ton of people that work here, and rent, etc. For some of you, this is obvious. It's super obvious. But for others, I want to make sure that you understand how it works. So why are we doing the membership drive? Because that's revenue. That actually makes you sustainable. And this is really important, guys. It's revenue that comes from you guys, so we have to serve you. I've said this from day one. I want to align our financial incentives with what you guys want. If it's aligned with what other people want, and I get it, look, sales is still a huge part of the industry, and to some degree it has to be. That aligns you with the advertisers, okay? And then there are other interests, and that aligns you with other people. I would rather be aligned to you guys. So if we build those 100,000 members, we are rock, and they will not be able to move us. There is no pressure in the world that can move this show and this network if we're at 100,000 members. So that's what I mean by building the home of progressives together, because that's what makes us sustainable going into the future. And so I'll end on a fun note here. My daughter was just graduating preschool. That's apparently a thing now, graduating preschool. I'm like, well, I don't think I want to over-congratulate her on that. But anyway, they sing a song, and it's called The Wise Man Built His House. And it goes, the wise man built his house upon the rock, and every time she goes like this, she's 5 years old. Built it upon the rock, apparently that means really stable. Oh, the rain came down, I'm not gonna read the whole song to you, but the floods came up, and the wise man's house stood firm. And then they rub it into the foolish man. They say, the foolish man built his house upon the sand. The rain came tumbling down, the floods came up, and the foolish man's house went splat. I saw it. The point being, guys, is that I hope we're being the wise man by building it upon your rock. And I know you guys, and I know that you want a really, really progressive show on a network, and unfortunately, that one outside of us does not exist now, and without us probably would not exist for quite some time. If you're happy with lukewarm Democrat talk, there is some alternatives out there for you guys, but you want real strong progressives that are gonna fight back and that are gonna fight for you. This is how you build it. So I hope you guys can participate, tyt.com/join. Thank you.
All right, we have more Kavanaugh news for you, including a story that just broke, so let's get to it. The Senate Judiciary Committee has let everyone know that there will be a hearing on the Kavanaugh allegations on Monday, next Monday. And that is important. We don't know details about whether or not Kavanaugh is gonna testify or if Ford's gonna testify, but we do know that both parties have agreed to answer any questions that the Senate Judiciary Committee might have about these attempted rape allegations that Ford has accused Kavanaugh of. And this is important because remember, the Judiciary Committee was set to vote on Kavanaugh's confirmation this week on September 20th, but it appears that there will be a delay in that vote so they can make way for this hearing, which will take place a week from now. Now, there were some Republican senators who did call for a delay, and I want to give them some credit. First, there was Senator Jeff Flake of Arizona, and then Bob Corker of Tennessee, both Republicans who are retiring at the end of their terms, joined Democrats in urging a delay in the vote until the committee hears from Ford. The panel was scheduled to vote on Thursday afternoon on Kavanaugh's nomination, and as I mentioned, it doesn't appear that that will happen now that there will be a hearing next Monday. Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, a couple of things here, guys. One is, Flake is on the Judiciary Committee, so without him, they could not have gone forward anyway. If he voted to not confirm or to not wrap up the proceedings, the Republicans had no choice. and he clearly indicated that he would not go forward. So now that Flake came out, let alone Corker, if they lose Flake and Corker on the overall vote, let alone Murkowski and Collins, they're toast. He won't even get confirmed. So now that they realize they can't just push this through as they were originally planning, then that's why the hearings begin on Monday, because they're like, okay, well then we got to hurry. Because if it lasts any longer, we might not make it before the midterm elections. So now that the couple of Republicans have forced their hand, the rest of the Republicans are going, okay, then let's go, let's get them in right now. Get Kavanaugh on, get her in, and let's try to wrap this thing up. That's what you're seeing today.
Exactly. So to give you Flake's statement, he said, I've made it clear that I'm not comfortable moving ahead with the vote on Thursday if we have not heard her side of the story or explored this further. He continues to say, for me, we can't vote until we hear more. And as Cenk pointed, he is a member of the Senate Judiciary Committee, so it is important to have him on board. Also, keep in mind that Flake, just to be fair and full disclosure, he has been a vocal opponent and critic of Donald Trump, so that might be relevant to you. I want to make sure you know about that. Also, Bob Corker said the following: a delay would be best for all involved, including the nominee. If she does want to be heard, she should do so promptly. And if she does participate in this hearing next Monday, then it would be pretty prompt. So we'll see. Again, we don't know for sure whether or not she's agreed to testifying on Monday.
So Senator Collins is theoretically pro-choice, so she has to pretend that somehow Kavanaugh is not going to vote with the pro-life position, which he probably will. And he's voted against abortion rights in the past as a judge. So, but even for those who are pro-life, Corker, Flake, etc., well, they've got to. It would have been interesting to see what they would have done if they didn't hate Trump, okay? And if Trump had not attacked them over and over again. Because all the other Republicans stood firm. Let's go, let's get Kavanaugh in. Because we really need in their view, a pro-life justice, right? So we gotta, and they keep giving Trump credit because he got Gorsuch confirmed. They say that's one of the best moments of his presidency. I happen to think it's not that hard to get somebody confirmed. All you gotta do is pick a Republican when the Republicans are in charge and just make sure that they didn't commit attempted rape earlier. Oops, Trump couldn't even meet that bar. Anyway, we'll see how it winds up. But now, given how much Trump has antagonized Flake and Corker, when you get to what they consider to be a close call, because they do really want a pro-life justice on the Supreme Court, they go, nope, let's hear her out.
Yeah.
So that's Trump screwing himself by being, as usual, over the top, antagonistic to people he might need later. It's because he has no sense of politics or decorum or basically getting anything done.
Right, but also consider that even if Flake and Corker are vocal opponents or critics of Donald Trump, they have voted along with his policy proposals and basically do what he wants. But in this case, they're speaking out, and I still commend them for it, regardless of what their intentions are. I think that they're still doing the right thing. By the way, Senators Murkowski and Collins also released a statement about this. Murkowski saying, I think that might be something they might have to consider, meaning postponing the vote, at least having that discussion. This is not something that came up during the hearings. The hearings are now over, and if there is real substance to this, it demands a response that may be something the committee needs to look into. And Collins also said, I want to have both individuals come before the Senate Judiciary Committee to testify under oath. Both individuals have agreed to do that. It just remains to be seen whether or not they're planning on doing it this coming Monday.
So those comments were before the news broke just a little while ago that the hearings are going to pick back up next Monday. But it's because of those comments that happened. Okay?
Exactly.
And then one more from Orrin Hatch, who is firmly on Kavanaugh's side and says he believes him. But he says, if that were true, Ford's allegations, I think it would be hard for senators not to consider who he is today. So even Hatch saying, well, if it's true, that's not good news.
Right, and Hatch so far has been defending Kavanaugh pretty aggressively.
Yes,
so,
very much so.
Yeah, one other part of this story that is, in my opinion, important. Last Friday, there was a letter released that was signed by about 65 women who know Kavanaugh, who have known him throughout the years, and who supported Kavanaugh and his character. They were vouching for him. Well, today, there are individuals who have known the accuser, Christine Ford, and they are sticking by her side, and they have some allegations of their own that I think are interesting, not in regard to Kavanaugh, but I do want you to hear their statements. Now, this letter that was signed by women who have gone to school with Ford say the following: "We believe Dr. Blasey Ford and are grateful that she came forward to tell her story. It demands a thorough and independent investigation before the Senate can reasonably vote on Brett Kavanaugh's nomination to a lifetime seat on the nation's highest court." This is the part that stood out to me. They also write, "Many of us are survivors ourselves." The letter had received 36 additional signatures as of Monday morning.
Just to be absolutely clear, they're not referring to Kavanaugh in specific in being survivors. So this is partly to counter the Republicans' letter that came out a day after the allegations, where they had 65 women. And by the way, I should correct the record on this. When we were discussing it, I said I thought those were women that knew Kavanaugh all throughout his career. No, those are 65 women that knew him back in high school till now, spanning that 35 years. So they did all know him from high school. They apparently got, the Republicans claim they got those signatures within 24 hours. That seems totally unbelievable. So, and I think Anna made a terrific point about that on Friday. So how did the Republicans get this letter all ready to go to defend Kavanaugh if they didn't know about the charges? Now a lot of people made that point, but Anna added on top, remember when Mitch McConnell warned Trump, don't pick Kavanaugh, don't pick him, and he said it was because there was too much of a document trail. Too many documents? That's what Mitch McConnell was worried about?
Yeah.
Perhaps there were some Republican senators who already knew about this, had the letter prepared, and that's why they were telling Trump, don't do it. Could Trump, by the way, having heard the allegations, think, what's the big deal? I've been accused of similar things, and move forward anyway? Now we don't know yet, but it is curious that McConnell gave that warning, and it is curious that they had their letter ready to go immediately.
Absolutely, and also keep in mind that the paper trail or the documentation regarding Kavanaugh's decisions and rulings in the past, it was just par for the course when it comes to a conservative judge. There was nothing that really stood out during the confirmation hearings that would convince Republican senators to vote against Kavanaugh. So I remember during those confirmation hearings, I'm like, oh, something really bad's gonna come out. And nothing came out from those documents. I mean, nothing that would upset Republican senators. Of course, stuff came out that would upset progressives or left-leaning lawmakers, but overall, it was to be expected. The stuff that came out was to be expected. So I don't know, look, this is obviously my speculation, but I feel like McConnell was worried about these allegations that did come out.
No, it's a really good point. It could be that McConnell was worried that it would take too long, and now it is taking too long, but not because of the documents. But it is also possible that McConnell thought, look, I got 51 votes and they're locked in. I don't have to worry about anything unless it's something so bad that the Republicans would have to vote against him. And so his warnings to Trump are at a bare minimum relevant and should be investigated as to what Republican senators knew before these allegations came out.
So final part of this story that I want to touch on is the smear tactics, smear campaign. Individuals aligned with Trump's White House are quickly getting to the smear campaign to essentially discredit the woman who came forward accusing Brett Kavanaugh of attempted rape back in the 1980s. Christine Blasey Ford is the name of the accuser. And when she came out with specific details to the Washington Post about this alleged assault, number of Republicans, including Donald Trump Jr., came forward with ridiculous, statements about her. So first, let's go to Donald Trump Jr. He posted an Instagram post about how Dianne Feinstein this is all a political game, and I'll give you the statement. He says, oh boy, the Dems and their usual nonsense games really have him on the ropes now.
So I just want to be clear, he's kidding. So he doesn't actually think that Kavanaugh is on the ropes. But that's probably the classy thing to do, to joke around about attempted rape during the Supreme Court confirmation hearings. The guy has no sense of what's proper, but can you blame him? He grew up with Donald Trump as his moral guiding figure. That was his dad. And so he doesn't get that you're not supposed to joke around about stuff like that. But that's Donald Trump Jr. for you, as usual.
He continues to write on his Instagram post, Senator Dianne Feinstein had the letter in July and saved it for the eve of his vote. Honorable as always. I believe this is a copy for full transparency. And at that point, it's the photo that he posted on Instagram. Trump Jr. added posting a picture of a letter that reads, "Hi Cindy, will you be my girlfriend?" So he's essentially minimizing what Ford alleges, which is attempted rape, by making it seem as though, all Kavanaugh did was write her a cute note in crayon asking her to be his girlfriend.
In fact, a lot of Democrats were mad at Dianne Feinstein because they thought she was too respectful of Ford's wishes to remain anonymous and that she should have released this earlier. In fact, it was a Democratic colleague that went to The Intercept and forced her hand, basically Feinstein's hand. So if Feinstein was trying to do political tricks and release this at the last second, well, she chose a curious way of doing it because then she got blamed by fellow Democrats because it looked like she was never going to release it until someone else made her. So maybe you could blame other Democrats if you're a Republican, but it seems like Feinstein is the one person that I don't want to say was covering it up for you, but was not bringing it forward based on, she says, the wishes of Ford.
It's funny because the Trumps seem to have a hard time keeping track of things that both, help them or hurt them. Like Donald Trump Jr. is like, oh yeah, she held on to it till the 11th hour. I mean, she didn't just hold on to it. Dianne Feinstein isn't the person who revealed her identity. This happened the way that Cenk described. The media got hold of the details, the information, the identity of the accuser. They were contacting her incessantly. And she saw that the narrative was being controlled by people who had no idea what happened. So she decided to come forward and reveal who she was. By the way, I have no love for Senator Feinstein. I think that she's a complete and utter disaster. And I wish that she would have been voted out of office during the primaries. But with that said, I think the way she handled this, she was in a tough spot because you have a woman coming forward with these allegations. She demands to remain anonymous, and you have to honor that. You have to respect that, especially given how incredibly rough it is for a woman to come forward with sexual assault allegations against a person in a position of power.
As we're seeing here.
Yeah, exactly. So, by the way, Donald Trump himself, he is doubling down on his support for Brett Kavanaugh. He says that Kavanaugh is one of the finest people he's ever met. And he also—
in this case, that might be true.
It might be true.
But that's a very low bar.
Yeah, especially for someone who's been accused of sexual assault himself by several different women.
That's Donald Trump.
Donald Trump, yes. Trump has no intention of dropping Kavanaugh's nomination, and that the White House plans to try to defend against the charges that were made. And it's already playing out. We're already seeing it. The final part of this is Orrin Hatch. So Senator Orrin Hatch believes Kavanaugh, does not believe the accuser, and he's been very clear about it. Take a look.
So I talked to him on the phone today.
And what did he say to you?
Well, he didn't do that. And he wasn't at the party. So, there's clearly somebody's mixed up.
He said he wasn't at the party that she's referring to?
Yeah. He's a very strong, decent man.
And you believe him?
Yeah, I sure do.
Do you believe the accusers at all or not?
Well, I think she's mistaken. I think she's mistaken something.
You see, I don't know how Orrin Hatch knows. So when the story came out, we had a tough conversation about how do you know, right? And we talked immediately about what if the shoe was on the other foot. Now, things seem to be a little bit clearer based on all of the evidence that has come out about how she told the therapist took it in her notes back in 2012, and that it had forced, she talked about it in the couples therapy because it was so traumatic for her and it was creating issues for her with other men, etc. So now there's a lot more evidence that seems to indicate that she talked about this earlier, etc. Right? Okay, so that leads me to believe her. for the moment being, we'll hear their testimony. I mean, anything is possible, right? But Hatch, either having seen that evidence or no evidence at all, goes, no, he's positive, Kavanaugh's right and she's wrong. Other than your politics, how could you be positive of that? That doesn't make any sense.
Well, Orrin Hatch has displayed a pattern of doing this, especially when there are similar allegations or allegations of sexual misconduct against Republicans. So we're gonna take a little time machine back to earlier this year, where Orrin Hatch decided to believe Rob Porter over his ex-wives in domestic assault or domestic abuse allegations. So again, this is Orrin Hatch from earlier this year. Take a look.
What was your conversation like with him yesterday?
Well, I'm somebody who believes in helping people. And it was a conversation to let him know that if he needs help in the future, I'll try to be there.
Thank you, Senator.
He's a good guy, no question. I really don't understand what happened there.
Do you believe these allegations against him? Do you believe the women?
I don't believe them all, but I think there's enough there that you have to take it very seriously.
So why don't you believe them all? And if you're taking it seriously, it's constantly with Hatch, and unfortunately with a lot of the older Republican senators, let alone older men throughout society, is gut instinct is, I believe the guy and I wanna help the guy. Like the victims, yeah, right? But the guy needs help. Kavanaugh, of course I believe Kavanaugh.
He's a great guy.
He's a great guy.
Yeah.
Porter, I went to go see how he was charged, the accusations were that he beat women. And he's like, I gotta go see how I can help him.
There was a photo of one of his ex-wives with bruises on her face.
Yeah.
That went viral.
And look, I get it, they worked with these people. And so they formed bonds and friendships, and if I'm being super fair to Orrin Hatch, he didn't see that side of Porter, so he wanted to help the guy that was helpful to him in his dealings with him, etc. But at a bare minimum, you have to be more mindful of the potential victims. And so often, we see callous responses that is not mindful of that at all.
Exactly. And if we go even further back to the early 1990s, when Justice Clarence Thomas was dealing with allegations or trying to defend himself against allegations by Anita Hill, Hatch did the same thing and simultaneously bashed Anita Hill. Take a look.
Judge, there are a lot of things that just don't make sense to me in Anita Hill's testimony. I liked her personally. I thought she presented herself well, and I think everybody who listened to her wants to like her, and many do. But Judge, it bothers me because it just doesn't square with what I think is some of it doesn't square with what I think is common experience and just basic sense, common sense. And I know it outrages you, as it would me, as it would anybody who is accused of these type of activities.
Yeah, I mean, Orrin Hatch has never experienced anyone put pubic hair on his can of Coke, so it doesn't square with him. That's just what he thinks.
I mean, that's so frustrating because so the pubic hair in the Coke is the most commonly used example, but I think it's among the worst examples of what Clarence Thomas did with Anita Hill. He kept badgering her for sexual favors and to go out with her. That's a million times worse than a joke about pubic hair and the Coke, etc. So so Orrin Hatch, have you had females constantly haranguing you for sex at work? I'm gonna tender a guess that the answer is no. Okay, so it reminds me of when white people say, cops don't beat me up for no reason, so I guess they're not doing it to black people. No, it doesn't mean that at all. It just means you didn't experience it. So, and the fact that you have no empathy for all these decades, Orrin Hatch, you've had a chance to develop empathy and still haven't done it yet. Mm-hmm. So now other lines of attack they're gonna use in what they're calling their counteroffensive is going to be, hey, they made these accusations late. That does not affect the credibility of the accusations even 1%.
Right.
So I think that's a really weak argument. They're gonna say that the accuser never told anybody about the incident at the time when they were in high school. She did tell therapist in 2012 and 2013, and it's documented in their notes, but they say no, she should have told somebody at the time. What else should she have done as a young girl who was 15 years old and had nearly been raped? She said on her way home, she was so worried that somebody was going to notice that she was abused and ask her about it because she was so afraid of what people might think and why was she at the party where there was underage drinking, etc.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna go back in a time machine and blame her for everything she did on that day when she was the one attacked.
It's also,
so that's the attacks that are coming.
Let me add to that. It's very common, extremely common for victims of sexual assault or rape, both men and women, to feel like it was their fault, even if they were the victims. And so they feel shame about it, and as a result will not report it, will not tell anyone about it. So that's something to keep in mind. I mean, she was 15 at the time. And so coming forward and talking about that publicly at that age is not an easy thing to do. And I wouldn't, put it against her for refusing to do that at the time.
And Megyn Kelly presented two sides of this on NBC. And to be fair to her, she made a very good point on the side of the accuser, saying, why would the accuser put another friend of Kavanaugh in the room if she was making it up? She knows that that guy will very likely testify with Kavanaugh whether it's true or not true. So that adds credibility to the accuser. That's a great point by Kelly. But she also went on to explain what the different lines of attack will be. She said they will be looking to see if she's a quote unquote proven liar. So they will try to analyze everything she's ever said to try to create that track record in a sense. And then she put out this conjecture I wouldn't have even thought of, but I think right-wingers do think this way. She said, well, maybe she carries a grudge against Kavanaugh because she actually wanted Kavanaugh and he blew her off. I find that to be inconceivable. Like to carry that for 35 years, make it up to a therapist 6 years earlier, that doesn't make any kind of sense. But will people start saying it? It's already on TV, etc. And so the onslaught is coming. So this is the tip of the iceberg. Prepare for the iceberg.
She took a lie detector test, okay? Blasey Ford did. I think that's important, and let's see if Kavanaugh would be willing to do the same. Let's get to the bottom of the truth. And if she was willing to do that, then it means something. And she passed that polygraph test. Let me be absolutely clear about that.
Okay, we got to take a break, guys. When we come back, we still have an amazing number of stories, including Ken Starr. What is his views on impeaching Donald Trump?
No.
No?
Just no, we're gonna do that story, but just no. Like that's my reaction to Ken Starr.
I think you might have broken the hypocrisy meter. We have a thermometer for the membership drive. If we had a thermometer for hypocrisy, I think Ken Starr would have just broken it. Anyway, we'll tell you about that. And when we come back, Jake Tapper does it again, attacks Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and does so in a way that, in my opinion, has a very big lie in the middle of the segment. And so I want to explain what that lie is and why he should have known or must have known that it was terribly misleading.
Yeah.
So we'll explain that when we return.